You're listening to What's Contemporary Now, a show about culture and the people, places, and things that together make it up. Zoe Ghertner is the photographic response to the growing conversation around things like the environment and even holistic health. With no shortage of conviction, her professional choices are just as informed by her personal values as her own lifestyle decisions. Bearing a grounded and recognizable gaze, her imagery's had reoccurring roles for brands like Miu Miu, Chloe, Wales Bonner, American and British Vogue, and our favorite independent titles, but perhaps more than her fashion work, it's her recent adventure with a product line called neoNutritions that best captures her love for all things good. Hers seems to be a world we might all benefit from venturing into.
This is Zoe Ghertner, and we're talking about what's contemporary now.
Zoe Ghertner, we have wanted to have you on the show for a few seasons now, so I couldn't be happier to be having this conversation today. And you've actually said that you've never done something like this before, so what's kept you from hopping on a podcast?
No one's ever asked, so I'm really grateful. Thank you.
I mean, it's absolutely our pleasure. Something that I find so fascinating is the fact that you're a New York native, but you appear to be born for the California dream. So what was the sort of pre-Parsons Zoe Ghertner like?
Well, New York native, I think maybe means someone from New York City, and I'm not from New York City. I'm from very rural New York State. I grew up on a hill in the woods and had a very imaginative childhood, a lot of which was outside and a lot of art. My mother is a ceramicist and a documentarian. My parents are both very spiritual people who aim to do a lot of good and do a lot of community work in the immigrant community around us, who are mostly farm workers, which is a subject matter my mother covers with her films. And I think I learned a lot from her how art can be partnered with doing good work and doing good for others and creating positive, clear messaging. Yeah, and then I ended up in New York City because why wouldn't you want to end up in a big city after living in the countryside? And it wasn't really the right place for me, even though I quite enjoyed it for a while. But New York was a bit too rigid and hard, full of too many extreme contrasts, which made life not so easy. And for my work, it wasn't beneficial for me, which is why I made that move to California, because life is easier in California. That's sort of what brought me to another coast and into another environment.
Well, now knowing that you had more of a rural upbringing, it definitely correlates a great deal better with the California sort of dream that you enjoy today. And listening to the influence that your mother's had, it makes sense out of a lot of what we've seen in your work and the values that you've really held throughout your career. For as long as I can remember, you've been very much about sustainability. You're very particular in terms of who you shoot and what you shoot and how you communicate things. And I think even as recent as during the span of your success, those things have been sort of adopted in a much broader way by the industry out of obligation from a more informed consumer or whatever evolution we've seen in the culture. But was there ever a time where you felt the need to sort of chase the level of success that would give you that degree of agency over those choices? Or were you sort of drawing those boundaries from the get?
When I started making pictures, I almost set off with a set of unwritten rules, and I couldn't even tell you what they are, but I knew what boundaries I wouldn't cross. And I don't mean on set with how I treat people. I mean, yes, I aim to treat people well and comfortable and in a kind environment, but more what my picture says and what makes my image my image. And so even as I shift and grow and try new things, I kind of always come back to thinking about my work in that way that I set off with in the beginning. And this industry has been through quite a bit of change in the past many years, and I've been pushing through a lot of things that I've felt needed to be seen in a different way.
Something that's always interesting to me is the paradoxical nature of being a talent, where you're expected to have an identity and a sufficient point of view to stand out, but you still have to be commercially viable and palatable to a broader audience. And then in the case of a designer, you want to operate with intention and you have the obligation to be more sustainable in your practices, but then somehow you were also expected to function as a business and have healthy sales. And so there are always these really interesting kind of conflicting things in this particular space. And I find it interesting the way you've managed to carve out such a unique role for yourself, and couldn't help but wonder if there ever is that struggle, right? To sort of achieve and sustain commercial success while also holding to these values that you have so deeply rooted within you.
It's always a little bit of a struggle because I wouldn't say that my work and consumerism go hand in hand. A big part of this industry is about consumption. But what I'm really interested in when I have opportunity to place my images in a space where more people get to see them, that part really excites me. So, yes, I might be selling handbags and sunglasses, but I get an opportunity to put my work out there to show people in a different light and express something that I feel is important.
Something else that we obsess over at the moment, or I do anyway, is the notion of multi hyphenates. And inherently, as an artist, you are a multi hyphenate where you have your commercial work, which obviously to you has a degree of being personal just the same. But then you also have your personal work, which is entirely separate. You've done books, you've done exhibitions. We'll get into some other extensions in the Zoe Ghertner world. But how do those things inform one another in your kind of creative process? Do you feel like you're more fueled by the personal work? Is it the commercial side that informs the opposite? How do they come together?
They are kind of made in almost the same breath, and sometimes can even happen on the same roll of film. And it's not two different eyes, it's not two different ways of seeing or working. The way in which I work is really sort of connected. I don't see a separation in the work that I'm making.
The other thing that I find very interesting is the notion of you having started with still life. That's a very different world. And again, composition, and I would assume it's informed from different things. But how did that then turn into a pursuit of fashion photography?
It took some time, and I had a lot of support and a lot of people supporting me editorially through that transitional time where I would shoot bits and pieces of the body and trying to move beyond still life, but it was still life, even though it had a person in it. And then I finally had the opportunity to shoot a really good model, and that was Malgosia. And that was the first portrait of a face that I had ever made was with her, truthfully. Like, other than maybe some self-portraits that you always go through when you're a young photographer, you're kind of learning on yourself, and I think everyone goes through that. That was a little bit of a breakthrough for me, being able to work with someone with skills and ability, because before then I wouldn't have any opportunity to access models with real talent, and that was kind of the jump off for me. And I had a lot of learning to do from there, and it took me a long time to understand how to really deeply interact with people in order to find what my image would be and to get to the place where I am now. It took a very long time and a lot of training, essentially, in how to form a connection with a subject in such a quick amount of time. Yeah, it's been a journey.
I'm guessing the only school for that type of a thing is, of course, just experience, right? Doing it over and over.
Completely. I think only in the past few years, I feel like I've gotten to a place that it's sort of understood. The conversations I was having with my subjects were way more interesting than the pictures I was making, because I was working through this phase of digging deeply into who they were, who I was, and talking about really important things in our lives and having these like amazing conversations. But then I'd pick up the camera and it just wasn't as exciting as speaking with them. And I think I've been able to move beyond that. Also, my pictures are more understood now, so that when my subject comes into the shoot, into the day, they already kind of know what to expect.
And you've cultivated some pretty key relationships throughout the span of your career there as well. Obviously, Camilla Nickerson is one of those. You've done incredible work with people like Marie Shea, Fran Burns. What sort of goes into your decision-making process around who it is that you want to create these images with?
Oh, that's a good question. Camilla always says to go where it's warm. I think what comes with a long-term collaboration is many hours of conversation and deeper thought into what we're going to do for the day. The preparation is always there at the same amount when stepping into a shoot. But when you know what the goal is, not even just with what the image looks like, but what the image projects, when you collectively have a sense of what you're making together and what the storyline is or what the subject matter is that you're trying to speak about, it pushes the images into that space a bit more. The idea of picture making beyond kind of that flat plane and into something a little bit deeper.
We've talked about Malgosia as someone who was obviously a very pivotal and defining moment in that kind of progressive evolution that you've embarked upon. But what other benchmark moments stand out to you in terms of, I don't know, covers, perhaps exhibitions, campaigns?
I think I've been really fortunate to have a lot of female designers supporting my work. I think if you look back at the bigger bodies of work and collaborations that I've had, and I've been doing that recently, I've been reflecting on this and I see that I'm really supported by a lot of women in this industry. That to me means quite a lot. But as far as like big benchmarks, all of those women are my big benchmarks, all of my collaborations. And I'm not saying that just women are supporting me, and I work with a lot of men as well. But when I think about Phoebe Philo, Miuccia Prada, Gabriella Hearst, these women have really supported my career and allow me to grow and step into their worlds, which expands what my picture is about as well.
We often talk about things like the female gaze, right? And you definitely fall under that category for the obvious reasons. But what does it actually mean to you?
I can only speak to myself, but I think I'm just after seeing the world through a human perspective. And there must be something different. I mean, yes, the majority of the people I'm shooting are female. So there must be something different for that woman to step in front of another woman to be photographed than to step in front of a man.
Well, when you look at something like an entire issue, right? I feel like ID is probably the easiest reference when they had done the female gaze issue. Do you, as an artist and as a woman, see a quality in those images that feels like it's exclusively the result of a female gaze? Or is it really just more about individual photographers for you rather than a gender perspective?
That's a really good question. So much has changed in the industry, and I think that people are working in such a different way. Back in the day, yes, definitely, because that was all that there basically was. There were very few women shooting when I was really looking at fashion imagery. I was really traumatized, I would say, by what I was looking at as an adolescent, as a young woman. And I'm still working through that. I think part of my picture making process is working through what I've seen before and not as a reaction so clearly, but as a response to how that felt and feels in my body physically of seeing the male gaze and the woman so sexualized and put in such a box of perfection for so long in the fashion industry. And that's not like true to everything that was happening when I was younger, but true to the general commercial image that was out there, even by really talented photographers. And I'm not saying that these pictures are bad pictures and that these pictures are all harmful, but as a collective, when looking at that imagery, it did harm to me, and I can only imagine for other young women. So that's a big part of what that focuses for me in my pictures.
We're talking about how images can be triggering or traumatizing, and obviously how they do have an impact on the consumer as a whole. Do you feel like imagery also has the potential to be therapeutic and empowering?
I think so, definitely. I've always thought a little bit about mental health as a big part of the what and the why of how I'm making the pictures I make, because I've seen and felt the effects in the opposite sense. I feel as though it is possible, not only in the pictures, but on the day, to build up these people to feel great about themselves, to feel like they don't have to be perfect, and that even like the most beautiful woman in the world doesn't have to play that role for a few moments. It's scary sometimes, I think, for the people in front of the camera to sort of let go of their traditional skill set of image making and give in a little bit. But when it does work and when it does connect and gets out there in the world, then I think that it's beneficial for viewers to be able to see these beautiful people as real and not perfect, and find that beauty in these moments of imperfection and these moments of just being.
I remember an interview I had done with Steve McCurry years ago, and I asked him whether or not he thought that the incessant volume of imagery that we're exposed to on any given day has numbed our sort of relationship to visual content. And he found it quite an offensive statement to make and used the example that the invention of email didn't numb us to the use of words. But what is your thought on that?
Well, there are so many pictures being made and shared at the moment, and it is very hard to have a picture kind of break through that like doom scroll, I suppose. I don't think about it so much in the process of making the image. It's something that you sit with later on when a body of work is released, and you see it in the context of how images are experienced in the world right now. I think there's still a way to break through the quantity of images out there with that connectiveness.
Your latest solo exhibition, Held in the Palm, explores ephemeral beauty and sensuality, and I was curious to hear more about the sort of inspiration behind that and how it differs from your previous work.
We spoke about me moving to California in search of a better lifestyle in order to make the pictures I wanted to make. When I had my son 5.5 years ago, something kind of similar happened where there was a new way of seeing that I could feel I was looking for, and I just didn't know how to find it. I couldn't find it in the process of working that I was in. And on becoming a mother, I think I started to find that quite quickly. My whole perspective shifted on how I saw the world, I guess. And that informed this shift in my work and this new perspective on image making that has shifted my practice entirely, I think. My work has become less about those same goals within a fashion system and the commercial industry of image making, and has allowed me to find space for wanting to show different work in different context. And the opportunity to show this growing body of work this past year has allowed me to step a little bit into a new context. I've been working on a bigger book project for some time, and I had lunch with Grace Wells Bonner not long ago, and she was just kind of helping me to get a little fire under me to really reach out and get that published and get that out there. This body of work is finally feels like the right work to show in this different context.
How do those different types of disseminating your work stand out or stand apart from one another? Obviously, shooting the cover of a magazine versus doing an exhibition or putting out this new book that you're talking about. How do you value those different disseminations of your work differently?
Well, it wasn't until recently that with this newer body at work, that I felt a pull into a more quiet space. I've really very much enjoyed having my pictures sitting in, I guess you could say, really democratic, high volume places. I feel almost that with the work, I can do more good and really reach more people through billboards or pictures on the street or pictures in a magazine. Like, that has excited me this whole time. And it still excites me how I can reach so many people with my images in that context. It's a new thing though that's shifted in me, and that desire to show in more intimate spaces is due to this newer body of work where I guess I feel less need to shift and change things because so many of these things have shifted and changed. But I still feel it's very important for me as a female in the place where I am in the industry to still engage and hold my place because it's been a lot to get there. And I also need to because I need to work and I love it. It's becoming a little bit more two sides of the same coin as opposed to something in the same breath. The work is shifting a bit.
Well, we're talking about all of the different aspects of your photography and the personal work and exhibitions and books and publications and all those fun things. But what inspired you to venture into the health and wellness industry with neoNutritions?
So Neo came about with a friend of mine who started neoNutritions, Fee Steinvorth, and she was telling me what she was working on, and I was helping her kind of bring it to a bigger perspective. And so we decided to work on it together. And for me, it's really exciting to be able to talk about all those same things that we've been talking about, what I've been trying to do within the fashion context, to take the fashion out of it and to take the consumerism out of it and to be able to speak to spirituality and how accessible that is, as we're all human beings and we're all spiritual creatures. Spiritual creatures, I don't know if that's right, but we're all spiritual beings. And that is just inherent in who we are.
I mean, there's definitely a market for it, but do you feel like the sort of spirituality that you're referring to is growing in popularity in the culture? Is there's a greater need for it with all of this polarization and global events?
I think when it comes down to it, it's all really intertwined, I guess. It's all about connection, I think. My pictures are about connection, and what we're trying to do at Neo is about connection, and there's so much disconnect in the world right now. There's so much heavy, dark things happening that I really feel people are hungry for a deeper understanding of who they are, how to be present, and how to care for the world and the people around them from a more global perspective and not just in the immediate. So yeah, connection is such a huge thing right now.
How do you guys plan to stand out in such a populated and competitive market in terms of wellness products? Obviously, the production quality and manufacturing compliance are big aspects of how the product's made, but what is the sort of strategy there to break into the market effectively?
I think what we're offering is a little bit more of a partnership in people's pathways towards who they want to be and who they want to become. We're not offering just a product and here you go, take this once a day, here's a little bit of information and move on. What we really want to offer is a bit of education and a partnership in helping people to understand who they are and how they're feeling. And what we're working on is much more than the physical self. We're asking people to learn how to care for their whole selves, their emotional, mental, spiritual, physical selves all together because it is all interconnected.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a very enticing offering. Where can people buy it?
Right now on our website, there will be other places in the future, but we're working on that now.
Very exciting. It would feel like a miss to not ask you about advice you have for people who are looking to live better, because it seems to be a huge crux of your sort of existence. We're talking about these products, but also going back to what we had discussed in terms of your values from the beginning, things like sustainability or just living better in general. I think being present, connection, all of these things you're talking about are huge factors. So, what advice do you have for people who just want to kind of improve the way they're living in terms of maybe their carbon footprint, their impact on the world? It could be as simple as being present, but I feel like you're a good one to ask.
I think it's important to remember that you have control over what you want to be supporting and that simply choosing what you engage with does potentially have an ability to make a small statement.
Well, I feel like you're touching upon the power of attention, right? And what it is you give your attention to, not just your spending power, but also the energy of your focus.
Exactly. Very well said. But I think a good thing to remember, because I think there's an element of sustainability even in that. You know, I think we have to be careful what digitally we're engaging in.
Absolutely. It's a part of our diet. And that's a beautiful jump into our last and final question, which is, of course, what is contemporary now?
I think we touched upon this as well earlier, but I think that people are really searching for connection at the moment, even when so much is going on, that just the little things in life can provoke change.
That's beautifully said, and it absolutely resonates. And thank you so much for your time. It was nice to finally have you on.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of What's Contemporary Now. A special thanks to our show's producer, Cheyenne Asadi, who makes it all possible. Audio post-production by Griffin James, with original theme music by Joseph Top Miller and Chase Coughlin of The Black Soft, and visual design by Aaron Meager and Graham Prentice. Subscribe now to be the first to catch new episodes every week, and if you've enjoyed listening, we'd love to hear from you. Leave us a review and let us know your thoughts. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more listeners like you. Follow us on Instagram, Threads, and LinkedIn for additional content and join the conversation around what is contemporary now.